Hey fishes, have you ever seen this unusual fishing technique? Well, today we're going to put poor Gustave through something a little similar, but first, out of respect, I should probably ask if he's okay with it. Hey Gustave, how's it going? So, how would you feel about us using your body for a little ballistic experiment? Wait, don't tell me you don't know what wound ballistics is.
No.
Ah, what a relief. And I take it you're willing to give it a try. Perfect. Gustave just agreed to take part in a test where we're going to fire actual bullets at him. So today we'll be asking how painful would it really be and under what circumstances do you actually have a chance of survival. And to keep a bit of suspense, we'll aim for the stomach because a headshot would be over in seconds. Plus, we'll be testing bullets of increasing destructive power. So let's dive right in and ask today's big question. Taking a bullet, what's it like? Since we're working our way up little by little, let's start off with a BB gun. But not just any BB gun, we picked one of the most powerful kinds, firing with a force of about 2 joules. What's a joule though? A joule is just a unit of energy. 1 joule is tiny. It's enough energy to lift an apple a meter off the ground. Around 50 joules? That's a hard-hitting soccer ball. 400 joules? Dropping a bowling ball from waist height. And past 1000 joules, that's the force of a brick falling from a rooftop. That's the scale we're working with when we talk about bullet impacts. Back to the BB gun. And as you'll see, even though a BB gun is technically not a real firearm, it's definitely not something you want in the wrong hands. Okay, Gustave, head to the back of the shooting range. Well, there you have it, just 2 joules and it's already able to break the skin and draw blood. In a few minutes, that's going to turn into a nasty bruise. A BB gun alone can already cause real injuries, even take out someone's eye. So if you ever play airsoft or paintball, never forget your safety goggles. And if just 2 joules can hurt this much, I'll just let you imagine what's coming with our next weapon, 160 joules. For our next weapon, let's take a little trip to France, Gustave's home country, to talk about a very specific piece of equipment, the LBD-40 or rubber bullet launcher. This is a weapon many French people, especially protesters and people on strike, know all too well, since it's commonly used by riot police. For those of you outside of France, here's a bit of context. The LBD-40 is what's called an immediate force weapon, just like tasers or flash grenades. In other words, it's designed not to be lethal. The LBD fires 40mm rubber projectiles. They're way too big to actually penetrate the body, and it's meant to break up crowds, quote-unquote, safely. Well, safely is a pretty relative term, and Gustave's about to show you why. No surprise here, our guinea pig isn't looking so good, and that's pretty normal. Even though these rubber rounds are huge, they pack a punch, with about 80 times more energy than the BB gun pellet. At 160 joules, you're guaranteed at least bruises like this. Aside from the 44mm rubber round itself, the way this launcher works is basically the same as a regular firearm. It uses a gunpowder cartridge to fire. That's where all that power comes from, and that's why it's strictly forbidden to aim for the face, at least in theory. During major protests in France a few years ago, it's estimated that around 70 people permanently lost vision in one eye after being hit by these rounds fired by police. As for our guinea pig Gustave, he's still alive, but definitely looking worse for wear. So let's move on to the next level. Here we are, the moment you've all been waiting for, the famous 9mm. But before we continue, Gustave, could you please take off your bulletproof vest?
Huh?
I know him pretty well by now. In just a moment, he's going to take a 9mm round, the most widely used handgun caliber in the world. Ready to take 480 joules, Gus? All right, here we go. At first, nothing really happens. That whole thing you see in the movies where people go flying backwards after being shot, total myth. So is it normal that Gustave is still standing? Yes, because once again, it's a mistake to think that a 9mm bullet alone is enough to instantly drop someone on the spot. Unless you're hit in the head, the spine, or a major leg bone, you can often keep moving, at least for a little while. In fact, many gunshot survivors describe it as feeling like a light bump, almost like someone tapping them on the shoulder. And the pain, it doesn't always come right away. Sometimes people only realize they've been shot once they actually see the blood, just like Gustave here.
Huh?
For some, it can take a few minutes before the pain really sets in, usually as an intense burning sensation. But keep in mind, what Gustave is going through is just one example. A 9mm round can cause a whole range of different sensations depending on the distance, the angle, or what part of the body gets hit. In this case, Gustave actually got quote-unquote lucky. The bullet went through an organ that's surprisingly good at withstanding gunshots, the intestines. Well, as long as they're empty anyway. What makes an organ more resistant, in simple terms, is how stretchy it is. Because when a bullet slows down inside the body, it transfers its energy and digs out a much bigger hole than you'd expect. That's why just because the entry wound looks tiny, it doesn't mean the damage inside is the same size. The bullet actually carves out a tunnel inside the body, what doctors call a temporary cavity. You can actually see what this looks like in ballistic gel thanks to this simulation. And this is where the elasticity of our organs really matters. The more flexible an organ is, the better it can handle the sudden stretch and snap back into place without carrying too much. That said, Gustave's intestines still got punctured, so we're rushing him to the hospital before he loses too much blood. Because yes, in most gunshot injuries, it's the massive internal bleeding that ends up killing the victim. Could we just slap on a tourniquet around his torso? Absolutely not. But we do have another option, a groundbreaking syringe that injects tiny sponges directly into the wound. As they expand, those sponges quickly help the blood clot. It's basically the same principle as a tampon, just made for trauma care. So let's inject those into Gustave and get him prepped for surgery. In theory, Gustave should make it. The fact that he even had time to get to the hospital is already a good sign. Usually, when vital organs are seriously damaged, victims don't even make it to the ER. Now, the biggest risk for Gustave is infection. Not many people realize this, but for gunshot victims who survive the bleeding, infections are often what end up killing them. But since we're not in a war zone, I'm optimistic about our guinea pig's chances. And just to be clear, surviving a 9mm hit doesn't mean it isn't dangerous. A single, well-placed bullet can absolutely kill. On the flip side, some people take multiple shots and still live, like rapper 50 Cent, who was shot 9 times and is still around to tell the tale.
Why'd the guy shoot you 9 times? Was it drugs or something?
He was paid to do it.
Anyway, let's give Gustave a little time to recover before we move on to the most powerful round of this episode. This is a 5.56 NATO cartridge. This is serious firepower. We're jumping up to about 1,740 joules of energy. Unlike the 9mm we saw earlier, which is a cartridge used in countless handguns, the 5.56 is designed for assault rifles like the M16. And when you're talking about assault rifles, that means a longer barrel, and a longer barrel gives the bullet more time to accelerate under the pressure of the expanding gases. Does a faster bullet cause more damage? Absolutely, and that's why you can't judge by the size of the cartridge alone. In this case, the bullet is actually slimmer than the 9mm, but far more dangerous. But hey, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Gustave, get into position. Oh yeah, that packs a punch. The big difference compared to the 9mm is that this projectile is lighter, but much, much faster. To compare, the 9mm from earlier hit Gustave at nearly 800 miles per hour. But this 5.56, we're talking about 2,200 miles per hour. That's about 3 times the speed of sound. At that speed, the cavitation effect is way more dramatic. Brace yourselves, the temporary cavity inside Gustave's abdomen is 25 times bigger than the bullet itself. Now, this isn't even the most powerful caliber out there. There are heavier, higher energy rounds, but the 5.56 is still one of the most destructive in its class thanks to one thing: its instability. An unstable bullet starts to spin the moment it hits the body, wobbling like a spinning top. That tumbling motion rips through tissue and destroys everything in its path. And the longer the bullet, the worse the effect. So not only are we dealing with a devastating round, but this time it's hit Gustave's liver. That's much more serious than an intestinal wound because the liver isn't elastic. Some organs just don't stretch well, like the liver or the spleen. These so-called solid organs tend to get crushed when they absorb too much energy. energy. Cavitation tears them apart in ways that are unfortunately irreversible. At this point, Gustave is completely unconscious and bleeding out like crazy. The bullet went straight through him, and the exit wound is way bigger than the entry wound. Trust me, you don't want to see it. It's brutal. Given how bad he looks, I'd say Gustave won't make it before help arrives. Yeah, there it is. If there's any small comfort, it's that he didn't suffer long. He blacked out almost instantly. Now, you might be thinking this was just bad luck, but honestly, even if he got shot in his leg, for example, it wouldn't have been much better. A round like this could easily shred an artery, and he'd be bleeding out just as fast. And if a high-velocity bullet hits a bone, same story. The bone shatters, and the fragments act like tiny secondary projectiles, tearing up even more tissue. Bottom line, there's really no quote-unquote good place to get shot with an assault rifle. Maybe the limbs at best, but even then, odds are you're looking at an amputation. So as you've probably realized by now, getting shot can mean a lot of different things. It all depends on countless factors. The caliber and length of the bullet, the amount of gunpowder behind it, the length of the barrel, the distance between the shooter and the target, the angle of impact, which organ gets hit, and the list goes on. One thing's certain though, it never ends well. The tens of thousands of Americans who die from firearms every year are proof of that. That's roughly 1 death every 10 minutes. That said, other countries like Gustave's homeland aren't exactly in a position to give lessons either. In France, for example, around 1,600 people die from gunshot wounds every year, even though private gun ownership is technically illegal. And finally, have you ever had an experience like Gustave had today? Let us know in the comments.